So thank you all for being here today. We're so happy you could be with us. As general studies students, you have quite a few amazing individuals and departments and resources available to you as being an Ivy Tech student. And one of those is our financial aid area that is a huge help to our students. And we brought in somebody extra special today, our director of financial aid, Monique Ware, to talk to you about that today. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Monique. I will be here the whole time. I will turn my camera off so I'm not distracting. But if you do have any questions that you want to put in the chat, we'll be monitoring that as well. And Monique has a presentation, and then there'll be time for you to ask questions. So take it away, Monique.
All right, thank you so much, Amanda, for that introduction. So she said, I'm Monique Ware. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at our Indianapolis Ivy Tech campus. So I'm really excited to talk to all of you, hopefully get you some good information. And then at the end, as you guys are putting questions in the chat, I'll make sure to address all those and help get all of your questions answered so you can be ready to go for classes in financial aid. So I do have a brief agenda of what we're going to go over today, just so you all are aware. I'm going to go through the FAFSA, so the free application for federal student aid. I will kind of go over different scholarships that Ivy Tech has and some other opportunities and things that you may want to look into for scholarships. I will also go over work study in case that's something you may be interested in, or another funding option that can help with covering expenses for classes. And then with all these aid, I do want to talk about SAP, which is a satisfactory academic progress, just so you all are aware of how that ties into financial aid. I think it's a good thing to have. And then I'll open it up for any questions and give you guys answers as needed. So first and foremost, for financial aid, one thing that I want to really encourage, if you haven't done already, is to make sure that you do file the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, each year. So for the upcoming fall semester, the FAFSA has been open since October. You can file it now, get that completed and done. And we really encourage students to do that because that is a really big source of funding for most students, is through the FAFSA. So it's very much key that you get that filed and done. I've listed the website on there, that's studentaid.gov. So that's kind of the general website that can get you there to get that filed. And when you do the FAFSA, you do have to create what's called an FSA, or Federal Student Aid ID. So that ID is what you'll use to kind of sign that FAFSA and submit that, and then get that information sent on. So it is important that you do create that first when you're doing your FAFSA, and then once you have that done, then you can actually go through the application and complete your application and get that submitted. With the FSA ID, if you happen to be a dependent student, so someone that still has to use the parent information along with your information on the FAFSA, we do say that you want to make sure that you do not use the same email address for the parent and student. So they will attach this email address, will be used to help with your FSA ID later on if you ever have to reset it or anything like that. You have that email address that they can send that resetting to, the code and everything. So you want to make sure that you do use two separate email addresses because it is your own individual ID. So you don't want to share that with your parent. I just like to make a note of that. When you're filing the FAFSA, it does require a lot of information, some of it being, kind of the pertinent information of name, date of birth, social security number, that kind of thing. I always like to encourage students to make sure to look over that information and make sure it's correct when you're submitting that. You don't want to misplace and put the wrong date of birth. A lot of times you get students that will put this year instead of the actual year they were born, just out of habit. So you want to make sure not to do any of those mistakes. And then with the FAFSA, they do allow for you, they ask some income questions, but they do have a tool. It's called the IRS data retrieval tool. And it'll actually pull in your information from the taxes you may have filed into the FAFSA. So it makes it a little bit easier. You don't have to kind of go line by line with your tax information. You can actually import that information directly into your FAFSA and save you a lot of time when you do that. So we do really encourage, if you're able to use that option, to go ahead and do so. If you didn't file taxes, then you may not be able to use that option, but if you did, it saves time. It helps out a lot to do that. Just so you know, when you file the FAFSA, it will take a couple of days to get processed. So it gets sent to the federal government and they will process and update that information. And they do allow for you to choose school. So you can put Ivy Tech on there and we can get those results. And it'll take about 3 to 5 days for us to get that information back. So just be aware of that if you file it today, hopefully, if you haven't done it already. We'll probably get it early next week just because it takes a few days for it to process and get sent back to the school with that information. So here's kind of the fun part, the interesting part, or what probably everyone really cares about is scholarships. So we do have lots of institutional scholarships available to students. So it is really, really important if you are looking for some other funding outside of the FAFSA that you do our scholarship application. So I've listed the link on there, which has all of our different scholarships that we offer through Ivy Tech. There are lots of them. Some of them are tied to majors. Some are tied specifically, possibly based off of interest or things like that. So there are a lot of different ones, but we really highly recommend that you do our scholarship application. We've got some deadlines that are kind of priority deadlines. So students who file and do the scholarship application by these dates may get first priority. I realize that for the fall, July 1st has already happened. That is okay. You can still get it filed. We still have funding and stuff. So I would highly encourage that you do our scholarship application, and you can access that through your My Ivy student portal. With our scholarships that we have for students, some of them, as I mentioned, can be tied to majors. Some do require that you have a FAFSA on file, but not all of them do. So that, once again, is another reason why you should file your FAFSA, is just it may make you eligible or put you into the pool for more scholarships, but not all of them do require a FAFSA. So if for some reason you're not able to do the FAFSA, you can still do our scholarship application online and still possibly qualify for some other scholarships. I do like to let students know it is a little long, and I say long because it does have 2 essays with it, but it's well worth doing the essays because it's for 2 of our bigger scholarships, so there's additional funding, so it's definitely worth doing those essays. And then it does also ask for some letters of recommendation. So that may be if you're just coming out of high school, that may be maybe a possible teacher that you had in high school who could do a recommendation, or if you've been at Ivy Tech for a semester or 2, maybe you had a professor that you really liked that could do a recommendation for you as well. So those may be some possible options when you do that. But it's best to get through the whole application because, as I mentioned, it can open up the door for some additional free money if you do that. So we really do encourage our students to do that. Basic eligibility criteria, you do have to be admitted, obviously, so admitted. And then FAFSA does help, but it's not a requirement as mentioned. And then another thing is most of these scholarships do require that you're meeting SAP, so satisfactory academic progress. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little later, but I do want to at least mention that that is some criteria for our institutional scholarships. Outside of Ivy Tech scholarships, there are other scholarships that are, available to students, but it does take a little bit of legwork on your end. So these are some things you may want to think about when you're doing outside scholarships or searching for them. If you are currently working, you may want to check and see if your employer has an in-house scholarship. Some employers do offer scholarships for students. Churches, clubs, or things that you may be volunteering or helping out with may be good places to look as well. Google is always classic. Google search sometimes helps. I did list one website on there, the FastWeb. That's kind of like a scholarship generator website. So you can kind of create an account there and then you can search on certain things. So if you know what you're majoring in, you can search by your major, something along those lines. Deadlines will vary for these different scholarships as you're doing your research. I will say typically most scholarships usually have deadlines in the spring if it's an external scholarship, but there are some that have fall deadlines too. So it's just best to go ahead and do your research and see. But a lot of times they'll just take kind of that extra legwork of kind of searching and seeing what's available out there and what kind of scholarships may be offered externally outside of Ivy Tech. Another type of aid source that I do want to mention besides scholarships and through the FAFSA, but we also have a really great program through the state, which is the Next Level Jobs or the Workforce Ready Grant. This is a really great option for students to help cover the cost, their tuition cost for some of our certificates and technical certificate programs that we have. So this Workforce Ready grant will pay all required tuition and fees that are specific to your technical certificate or certificate that you are pursuing. You can have it for up to 2 years while you're getting that technical certificate or certificate. Um, it does require that you have to file a FAFSA first, but there's no income threshold. So unlike some other aid that you might qualify for through FAFSA or not qualify for, so federal grants or state grants, the Workforce Ready grant is not really based off of income. So as long as you do the FAFSA, you could still qualify as long as you're in an eligible program, which I said has to be either a technical certificate or certificate. And then there's certain ones. If you've got questions or want to know which one specifically, if you wanted to put in your chat your email address, I'll be happy to send you the qualifying programs for this upcoming year statewide, just so you kind of have an idea. And these programs do also require that you are meeting satisfactory academic progress. Just something else to note for the Workforce Ready grant, there is a credit hour requirement. So if you are considered a dependent student, you do have to be full-time. So that would mean at least 12 credit hours or more to be eligible. And if you're an independent student, then you have to be at least half-time. So at least 6 credit hours or more during that semester to be eligible for this. And then the final piece I like to let everyone know is it's a wonderful funding source. So it does cover all required tuition and fees for the program you're in, but it is kind of like a last dollar thing. So it will use all other aid funding first. And then if there's still something that's not covered, or if you didn't qualify for any other federal or state grants prior to, then that's when the Workforce Ready grant kicks in. So I just like to let everyone know that, just so you're all aware. Some other resources and things to think about that may be able to help you cover tuition costs and expenses. So fee remission or tuition reimbursement. Once again, possibly if you're working, your employer may have some options like that that you could utilize to help cover those expenses. So we've got Achieve Your Dreams, where you can utilize and have your employer help cover some of those expenses. Amazon's a big one. I know that they help cover tuition for a lot of our students. I've heard Starbucks also does this, and then there's other companies within Indianapolis and stuff too that also offer this wonderful source. So that may be something that can help cover your expenses, and it's typically paid directly through the bursar for on your account. Also, some things to think about: if you're a veteran, there may be some veteran benefits that you may qualify for too. So if that's if you fit into that boat, we do have some federal benefits. There's also some state benefits as well, sometimes for children or spouses of veterans too, that may be able to help cover tuition expenses. So just something to keep in mind, that these may be some other avenues to help cover expenses for students. And then there's also voc rehab as well. So I like to kind of just mention these other outside sources that maybe you might fit into that genre that could help cover your cost of tuition at Ivy Tech. One last other funding source that I think gets overlooked a lot is work study. So we do have a work study program here at Ivy Tech, and work study is where you can work on campus or off campus actually, and earn federal dollars that can help cover, it's basically your money as you earn it, and you could use that money then to go towards covering your tuition expenses. So this is a wonderful option. It's part-time employment, so it's not full-time, because we obviously want to make sure that, hey, you're still able to do your studies and get the grades that you need to stay eligible for financial aid, and obviously to get your final certificate, technical certificate, or associate degree that you're going for. But this is a really, really great program, and it's been expanding over the last couple of years here, but we do have the availability for you to work on campus if that's easier. You could have an on-campus job, so, finish class, and then you can maybe work at one of our areas or departments here at the Ivy Tech campus. But we also have the opportunity for some students to be able to work off campus and get funding through this program too. So if you have an internship that you're maybe thinking of doing that will help get you experience through your major and it also happens to maybe be an unpaid internship, we may be able to help make that be paid through work study. There's a couple of things that the employer will have to do. They do have to sign a contract and get some other things in place, but that may be an option that instead of it being an unpaid internship, it could be paid and it's still giving you that work experience, but you're also getting paid as well, which is always really nice. So keep that in mind. That may be an option for you if you are trying to do an internship or maybe required to do an internship, and it's unpaid. We could maybe make that be a paid situation for you. Work study is a need-based program, so it is going to require one, that you have a FAFSA on file, and two, that you have the need and eligibility for it. So our office is able to make that determination once we have your FAFSA results. We can check to see if you do qualify. But always check and see. There's a wonderful option and a great way to get that experience and funding. So let us know. It does require that you are meeting SAP. So that does mean that you've got to make sure that you're having at least a 2.0 GPA, that you're completing these 2/3 of your classes, and also completing your degree within 150% of that time frame. But if you're doing all that, it's definitely a wonderful option, and I'm happy to answer more questions about that too later on. Finally, I do want to go over SAPs. I've kind of mentioned a little bit, but if you're unsure what that is or what I'm referring to, as I mentioned, it's the satisfactory academic progress. So every student here at Ivy Tech, whether you're getting financial aid or not, needs to be making sure that they're making progress towards getting that certificate or associate's degree that they are pursuing. So as you're going through your program, there are certain requirements that are needed to be able to graduate. So we have different standings depending on how you're doing. So if you're in good standing, that means that you're meeting everything that you need to be. You have the right GPA, completing your classes and everything. For SAP, we do have a warning period. So if for some reason your GPA has slipped below a 2.0, or you're struggling with your class or something like that, or aren't meeting the completion because you had to withdraw, because life happens sometimes, there is 1 semester of warning before you're actually terminated. So you do kind of get a chance to kind of redeem yourself and get things back in place before the termination would happen. And then if you are terminated, so it's kind of 2 sides to it. There's obviously the academic side and things that you may have to do to get yourself in good standing on the academic side. But for financial aid, if you are terminated, you're no longer eligible for financial aid if that happens. However, there are ways for you to get back into good standing if you happen to be terminated from financial aid. So I do like to let students know that is not the end all be all. If for some reason you have been terminated from financial aid, we do have the option that you can appeal. And if you appeal, we have steps, and I'll kind of have that on another screen here to go through to be able to submit and include some additional documents, and a letter to explain what happened, why you fell out of good standing. And we have a committee that meets once a week, that can go through, look through, and see if we can maybe possibly approve your appeal to help you continue on and be able to be eligible for aid again. I do want to go over the requirements here real quick, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit more about the appeal process as well, and maybe what happens if an appeal is denied. So first and foremost, with our SAP guidelines, so to maintain and be in good SAP standing, you do have to have at least a 2.0 GPA or higher. It also requires that you are completing at least 2/3 or 67% of all your attempted courses. So that means if you take 3 classes in the fall semester and you only pass one of those classes, then you're falling out. So you need to make sure that you're completing it, or at least passing at least 2/3 of those classes that you would take. And then it also requires that you complete whatever program you're going for, whether that's a certificate or associate's degree. You have to complete that program within 150% of the time it would take to complete it. So for example, if you are going for an associate's program and it takes 60 credit hours to complete that program, you can take or attempt up to 90 credit hours and be able to complete that program without being terminated because you're meeting that max time frame, is what that means. So just kind of want to make sure students are aware of that. It's very important. I think a lot of times students are sometimes surprised that they're not eligible for aid if they fall out of SAP. So it's just important that you all have that knowledge and information ahead of time. So if you're doing a SAP appeal, here's roughly kind of the process that's needed. So you do have to do an appeal and submit that online. And you do have to meet with an academic advisor or our student retention team, and they will kind of help set up an academic plan, which will help you get back into good standing. So you have to do that along with submitting a letter, kind of explaining your circumstances, and then provide any additional documentation that will go with these extenuating circumstances. So it needs to be extenuating for why you weren't doing well. So just saying I didn't show up to class isn't going to be sufficient enough. It needs to kind of be something more extenuating beyond that. So maybe there was a car accident, maybe you had COVID, something a little bit more extenuating as to why you weren't able to either get the GPA you needed or complete the class that you're supposed um, to stay in good standing. So we review all that information through our committee and make the decision whether to approve or deny. I will say most of our denials typically come because the student doesn't have any documentation. So it is key that you do have to have documentation to be approved, along with all these other steps as well. If for some reason your appeal is denied, we do have some other funding sometimes that can assist students to help them along their way. So there are some other scholarships that can sometimes be of assistance to you if your appeal is denied. So it's always in your best interest, no matter what, to at least submit an appeal, just to see, one, if you're approved, that's great. And if not, sometimes we do have some other funding options. So we do really, really try to help students along the way. And if for some reason you are denied and maybe we're not able to give you some additional funding, you can still attend if you want. It just would be out of pocket on your own dime just because you're not eligible for financial aid. So just know a termination for SAP on the financial aid side does not mean that you have to stop attending classes outside of having maybe been academically dismissed from the institution, okay? So I've got some kind of typical SAP questions. I think I've kind of addressed most of these. But as mentioned, if you are terminated, can you appeal? Yes, you can. Just make sure to include that documentation. And as I mentioned as well, if your SAP appeal is denied, you may be eligible for some other funding. If not, you may be able to attend on your own dime and maybe get back into good standing and be eligible again. So just keep that in mind. And that's really most of what I wanted to cover today and kind of go over for everyone. So I will open it up to any questions that you might have, whether that's about the FAFSA, if it's about scholarships, general financial aid questions, or anything about that, or about SAP as well. I am happy to answer and assist with.
I do not see anything in the chat at the moment, but I have a few questions that I'd like to throw out there just from having worked with students for a long time. Um, I see some of these things happen pretty frequently, so I think it's a great thing to talk about. In looking at SAP in particular, can you talk a little bit about like the process? Like students can go back into good standing for SAP at some point. So can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yes, so depending on whether you if you end up being denied possibly, or even if you're approved, but you're still technically on probation, you can end up back into good standing if you get back into what the requirements are. So let's say you had a 1.80 GPA. If you get it back to a 2.0, then you would be considered back in good standing for your GPA. Same thing for, having to make sure that you are passing at least 2/3 of your classes or 67%. If you get to the point where you've now completed enough classes that gets you above that 67%, that could put you back into good standing too. So yes, if you go become terminated with SAP, or if you end up on probation, as long as you hit those criteria again, that would move you back into good standing, and that would mean that you would be eligible to apply for financial aid again.
Perfect. So students could potentially pay out of pocket for a semester or two, but then if they meet those benchmarks again, they could be eligible again. So it's not you can never get financial aid again if you get
Correct. Yeah.
terminated.
Yep. Yeah.
The other thing I always like to talk about are if you do find yourself having to file a SAP appeal, like what those extenuating circumstances are. They're very, very, it has to be like a pretty significant thing that happened. Isn't that right? Like, it's not like, well, I just I didn't understand how it worked, and I didn't know the process, and I wasn't good at time management, and things like that really aren't considered extenuating circumstances usually, are they?
Correct. That is definitely correct. So yeah, it's got to be something a little bit out of the norm. It's not something that normally would happen. As I kind of gave some examples, like a car accident,
Hmm.
COVID is one that still counts as an extenuating circumstance for students. If you've had a death in the family, I know that's one that may happen, unfortunately, especially when we were dealing with COVID too. So something along those lines is not kind of your typical just,
Life
run of the.
happened kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yep,
So,
yep, exactly.
and the other thing, before I worked where I work now, I mean, I was at Ivy Textile, but I worked in academic advising. And so I would work with students, and we would always have a big influx of students right before the start of the term who wanted to try to get registered and who maybe like hadn't really thought about coming to school until recently, and they didn't have their FAFSAs in place and their financial aid and everything ready to go. Can you talk a little bit about, what students who find themselves in that situation, like what options they have, like as far as payment plans, um, until the financial aid comes in, and what that might look like?
Yeah, so payment plans may be an option for students. So it makes it a little bit harder the longer you wait. But if you
Absolutely.
are considering a payment plan right now, for those that maybe know, like, hey, we have to turn in some additional documents for financial aid, and it may take a little while to get some of those documents in or whatever, the Bursar will be opening up payment plans here, I think, in the next couple, well, really like week and a half. I think around July 15th, once bills and fees are assessed for students. And I do believe within that first week, they will kind of allow for you to set up. And I think you don't have to have the initial
The
like
down
payment,
payment.
the down payment with that first week. But let's say it's a little bit later and it's in August, and it's for students that maybe have waited to last minute, and that's okay. We all have our moments and
Yeah.
do that sometimes. There are still some payment plan options for students as long as it's before classes start. And they do allow for you to make that initial, you have to set up a down payment, and then you can spread that out a little bit to help until your financial aid kicks in. So
Mhm.
outside of that, there are some other options for students. Biggest thing is with the FAFSA, if you're having trouble with getting documents in and you're waiting to get your aid in, please reach out to our Express Enrollment Center. So we're happy to kind of help and assist you as best as we can and kind of help you get those documents in. We help students upload documents all the time. That can be a little tricky sometimes, getting it into the system for us to review all that information and things. So we are here to help. We've got also virtual Zoom rooms and a virtual help desk.
Which is
So if you
awesome.
aren't able to come to campus, we do have that option too to kind of help and assist you as well.
And the other thing I always like to say about this too, because I think sometimes there's some confusion about it. Let's say a student applies, they know they're going through the FAFSA process, but they're not there. So then they set up a financial or a payment plan, and then the financial aid doesn't go through. The students are still responsible for that financial payment plan at that point. So I do like to let students know that, like, if you're not sure that you would be able to cover this payment plan, maybe we need to talk about, and at Ivy Tech, we've got first and second 8-week classes. So at that point, maybe we need to talk about second 8-week classes so you have a
Yep.
little bit more time to finish your financial aid planning before classes start. So you're not having to put yourself in that situation of, I'm not sure if the financial aid is going to go through, and I'm also not sure if I can handle this payment plan. So just thinking through options with students too, and what's really going to work out best for them. So yeah, and like Monique said, there are so many options for financial aid assistance. Please take advantage of those. We've got our virtual front desk, the Zoom room help. You can go to campus for help. There are so many people and ways that they can help you, and I really would encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities because they really want to help and they're amazing at doing just that. Um, check in the chat. I don't see any questions in here. Are there any other questions that anyone has about financial aid or the process or anything related to it? And just if you think of questions after this, please feel free to reach out to Monique directly, or you can reach out to me and we can all talk. We're all here to help you be successful. And this is a huge part of that success plan for many students, is figuring out how that financial aid piece is going to be covered. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Monique. And I look forward to working with you with general study students in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. So I'm
Of
going to
course.
stop recording
Okay.
here and then I will hang out in case other people kind of pop in
Yeah.
and stuff a little bit later. So
Perfect.
um,